Welcome back, everybody. I hope you had some meaningful discussions during the breakouts. I believe we're going to do reporting closeouts. So, Leslie, do you want to coordinate that?
I wandered around all the different breakout rooms, and what I discovered was good conversation. So I'm not expecting us to have this awesome plan to lay out for the next quarter by the end of this, but I'm really curious to spend as much time as we need, 15 minutes max per group, really unpacking the kind of conversation that happened in the group. And we'll, I think at the end, see links between the different groups and a direction of travel that Kim and I will continue to work with you all next week. So team one, Steve, you were leading team one.
Okay, I'm going to give it a try, and then I'm going to ask other people to come in. I mean, we had a super fun conversation. I don't know if we were productive, but we were fun.
Is everyone promoted that you want to come in? Is there anybody we need to promote?
Jane, Michael, and anyone just send me a note if you would like to say anything justice.
Or we could just promote everyone and say, do you know what, now it's a conversation.
I think it'd be good to promote everybody. I think it's
I
fine.
agree.
Yeah, this is because so many people were included in this,
All
and
right.
it's not an overwhelming number of people.
Yep.
All right, we'll upgrade everybody shortly to panelist mode. But Steve, I think you can go ahead and continue.
Okay. So, I mean, one of the things that Leslie talks about quite a bit, and it was up there first for us to talk about, be more like Stripe. And one of the things that we came up with, we had different ideas of what that means. And so we wanted to clarify, what does that mean to be more like Stripe? And from there's one side of being like Stripe in that the payment product that they're offering. And so they're offering something cool, and we could be like them in that sense. And the other sense is like in the actual product that they are offering. The other sense is when you go to the Stripe website, it's very clear and guides you through the process of becoming a Stripe customer. And so in that sense, no matter what your product is, one of the things to be more like Stripe is to actually have a landing page that makes it clear when I go there what I'm supposed to do. And those were two separate things. We want to tackle those differently, was one of the things that came out of it. I would say the biggest thing that I thought was a comment from Justice that he said, which just stuck with me. So if there's one thing that came out of it, would be when we were defining like, okay, which use cases are ready and which cases should be ready. And he asked a quite simple question is, how are you defining ready? And it came to us that from the sense of the end-to-end user version of ready, maybe we don't have a very clear idea of that. And so that might be a good thing for us to really focus on. And if there's one thing, and let's focus for the next PI, there's one thing we can do, it's probably define what that means for us. And then the next thing of that, because we were saying, well, we were getting debates about which one of the use cases were actually ready to be able to show people. And so then being able to say, well, after we come up with that definition of what is ready or what is green, amber, black, or whatever, is to say, cool, now the next thing we need to do is go through our priority use cases and see where we are on that scale from an end-to-end standpoint. And we should have that somewhere. And so another thing of like, if there was something to do, that would be a pretty good thing to get done. Jane, I see your hand is up.
I just wanted to reiterate that the definition of done is not the technical definition of done, but from a advocacy or user perspective. How would they understand that this thing is actually working and complete? So it's not what is decided in a sprint planning session. It is what is done from Steve's perspective when he engages somebody and they are able to actually see live and happening what the use case is.
And
I'm
I mean,
so excited.
We don't have to define it, but it is that thing that we can all look each other in the eye, and we can look clients, and we can look users, and we can look adopters in the eye, and we can say, this use case is ready, and I know it's ready because we did it in a live environment with a real customer sending money to a real customer, and the whole thing worked. And I personally don't think we can say it's ready until then. But again, it's not my decision. That's something I hope we can all come to an agree on. I just gave my opinion, but everyone will have their own. but that's something I would like us to all agree on. If we can get something done and that's in writing and we post it and we say, this is what it means. And then we go through the next thing is, that I think somebody mentioned was like, what's the product brochure of Mojaloop that says, these are the things that are ready. And from that definition of ready, and therefore this is the brochure of Mojaloop. And again, it's not an on or off, because there are going to be some things that we have to come up with the scale, because as we've all talked about, there are some things that are by design never going to be ready, because that's up to the community or the implementer to do. But we just need to be very clear of
where our boundaries are.
Where our boundaries are, and what for this particular product feature, it is amber. And we are making a decision that is never going to go past amber, and here is why, and that is written down. And this was the date that we made that decision. And so when a hub operator comes back and says, wait, I'm not going to use this because you don't have that in green, then okay, now as a community, we know we have to go back and revisit that discussion because we lost a potential adopter because it wasn't green. But right now we can't have that conversation because that's not written down with a decision. Or maybe it is, and we just don't know where it is. The other thing that came out of that early discussion was also, again, and this is on me, but having a much clearer definition of what is the problem that we're solving for whom. And we solve lots of problems for lots of different people. And this is like taxonomy, I know, but the taxonomy of the different people in the community. And then what is the problem that we're solving for them? And what is the role that they're supposed to play? And then that's when we started getting into the portal. And this was, again, Leslie, when you said portal, I assumed that meant the Mojaloop IO portal. Some people thought that meant the business operations portal. So
I actually think it's something brand new, and it started at beta.mojaloop. It's Lewis's portal, where he's got some MVP documentation, product documentation rather than foundation documentation, and some explainer videos, and potentially some APIs and their documentation and things. So I think you're right to spot that I used the words and I didn't really define it, but that's my vision. I actually think show, don't tell needs to be our mantra, and there needs to be somewhere to show from. And so I've been championing this idea of, where do we show from? Is there some place that anybody can go?
Okay. And so then it comes a matter of like going back to the taxonomy thing of who do we show what? And so we were talking about Mojaloop.io and when. And so one of the things that Paula brought up, which was great, was these types of conversations are actually things that the marketing team needs to be on. So if in one heavy note that she brought up, which is great, is in the future, we're going to have them as part of these conversations. And I think that'll be very helpful.
I just want to jump in on that, Steve. We're so centered on business and market on Monday and Tuesday. We forget to remind those people to come back on Friday. And I know that Friday is a work in progress, but we should be saying, be on the alert. And, Thursday night, be reminding the MSG and the product council that we have these discussions going on Friday that we want them to participate in.
I'd add to that I actually did get Product Council reminded about today. And a big part of our problem today was the time zone. A session at 11 a.m. is really hard when your Product Council's champion demos are in the US. So maybe we need to also look at our Friday schedule a little bit in the future.
From the other side, I would agree. But for those of us that like Friday nights, on that note, though, the idea, Leslie, I know, is that it tied into define what our product is, or define who our folks are, and Lewis is worse than me. Define who our groups are, who our targets are. Define what problems we're solving for them, and then treat documentation and portals as a product in which we define a customer or a user journey that says, this is a regulator.
Touch point.
They come to Mojaloop.io. We need to tell them, we need to be able to grab them and say, oh, you're a regulator. let me take you on a journey. Oh, you're a hub operator. Let me take you on a journey. Oh, you're a developer. Let me take you on a journey. And those are going to be different journeys, but we need to treat it as a product so that we can do it that way. And
actually, we've said this at TGB as well, that actually that our documentation is part of our product. I think it's all starting to come together quite nicely. This mission, this pillar is really important to us as a community.
That was another major quote that came out of there, is treat documentation as a product. And so that was a big quote that came out of ours.
It's also, sorry, Steve, but it's also about what lens you use to display and to think through that product. And as Steve was saying, it not just masses and masses of things about Mojaloop or schemes or level one, but specifically targeted on a particular journey. So the lens of this kind of an entity, or a lens of that kind of a role, it is really important for them.
Awesome.
Yep. Thank you, Jane.
So we've used our 15 minutes for this. Is there any more things you want to say, Steve, or should we move on to the next group?
Actually, can I give the whole group 1 minute to say what did I miss?
So I think we've still got work to do on the asks and how do we resource the asks, and that we need to be quite honest with ourselves next week in terms of what we can actually achieve. But I love the direction of travel, that it feels a good direction of travel for us to get to our North Star goals. So thank you very much, guys. Okay, group 2, team 2 was business process.
Yeah, I think Cameron had to go, so James is going to pour it out. We can actually, James, if you want to show them the mirror board too, we actually might use that to facilitate the conversation.
Yeah, give me a second. I'll attempt to share my screen. I'm hoping you can all see the mirror board.
We can. It's quite small, so maybe we'll zoom in a little bit.
Apologies. I'll try and zoom in on the relevant bits. So we did quite a lot of brainstorming and thinking around this area. Obviously, the first thing we thought about was why are we doing this? And as we know, we're struggling with presenting the face of Mojaloop to new adopters, but also the existing user experience is a little bit cumbersome for existing adopters. So we thought about what the high-level objectives were, what business processes we needed to be able to support, how we might support those, what kind of non-functional requirements we might have for the UX. And we broke those down into loosely thinking about epics and even down to some kind of story level type things. And we just kind of lumped them all on the board for us to work through at a later date. We didn't have enough time to work out a proper sprint plan in true PI fashion. But you can see some of the high level things that we thought about, some of the business processes that we want to be able to support.
And it's worth saying that actually the product council team, who Kareem and Chetan, they were able to make it today. They've done quite a bit of deep dive work on the business processes they feel should be demonstrable as well. And Kadidi is part of the group at the moment, and we've been talking with Mo Ali about their needs and things. So quite a lot of this is validated, and it is, the conversations are underway. So today was an opportunity just to consolidate some more conversation.
Absolutely. Well, I think we were a small group, but I think we all agreed on what the priorities were and what those important business processes were. We kind of thought that
fundamentally starts from a business process perspective, though. Once we've got the business processes, it will be easier for architectural work to happen and understand. Yeah.
We were cautious to not think about it too waterfally and think about large upfront design of mapping out all the business processes in high detail. So we thought we'd take an approach of working out at a high level what all the business processes are, and then take one or two, or the highest priority, what we think is the highest priority set, and come up with a plan to try and deliver those in a PI.
And I think we lost Greg this afternoon. Greg was we've been talking already about this work stream. It's not a brand new work stream that we're dreaming up today, right? And we've been talking about, Greg actually has quite a lot of the infrastructure management tools, the login tools, the employee participation, the DFSP onboarding and things. He's got a lot of that stuff in his artillery already, and we've been thinking about how might we do good collaborative work to make sure that we see this marketplace thinking along the way with this work stream. But there's a lot of detail still to work through, and a big thing that came up with me with this group is, and I was popping across all 4 groups, and I was really spotting how we have the need for very critical resource in every single group. There were architects over in the technical roadmap group who really were talking about the same things as you were talking about in this group along the way. So it's good to see that there are common themes, and architectural needs to be taken into consideration as well.
Yeah, we did pick up things I can imagine would be of interest in the other streams, like authentication, authorization.
Actually, FRMS as well. It's that moment of, if you're going to have employees pressing buttons on website, that forensic log of what happened when employees press buttons needs to be going to FRMS streams. And everything is intertwined and interlinked, and that's where collaborative community effort can find the ways that we need to collaborate in the right way. Is there anything else that you wanted to highlight from this work in terms of
just that it's very hard to make a plan when you don't know what resource you've got available.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So I think all the work streams suffer from that.
There's a ton of stuff that would make a massive impact in this area, but we don't know how much we're going to get.
Exactly. So that's going to be a big part of the before we can plan, we need to understand resource 100%. Okay. Anything else you want to talk about?
Not really. Just that we thought we should be driven by the user rather than the technical. From the business process perspective, we need to think about what jobs the user has to perform and design user experience and API to support that, rather than try and think the other way around.
Yep. And I think that's why you started with business process, right?
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Okay. Possibly there's one more thing to highlight too. It's just worth saying out loud, I think, that we've been talking to one of the other work streams that will come up later about support for multi-currency and the like. And there is obviously implications for business processes as well. Have you thought about it at all in this work stream about multi-currency business processes prioritized versus those that aren't?
Well, we did. And there was a particular point where it was obvious there was a conflict and a crossover between what we think of as business process to support running a modular loop scheme, as opposed to the business processes that the participants might need to go through financially. Right? So a split between the administrative aspects of the API and the functional move your money from A to B elements of the API. Yeah, some of that was non-obvious.
And if you're a hub operator running multiple currencies, and how do you settle multiple currencies and get the settlement windows right, and all that kind of stuff is certainly an area where.
And it's going to be hard to define some of the details of those business processes, while the underlying functionality.
Whilst we create a product that is sufficiently generic as well. But it's a question of, is our product multi-currency or not at a national level versus at a cross-border level. So there's a lot of conversation still to be had, I think, around prioritization. But I just wanted to highlight that it's not forgotten as a conversation.
Well, I don't know if our product is multi-currency, but our settlement process definitely is.
There is a path through. There's
some holes in our windowing process that don't quite support multi-currency well.
No, there are. Sorry, there are some holes in how some people use it.
So we would like to plug some holes as we go, if it's possible, but that needs some conversation with deeper conversations. And I think that's where the work streams need to kick in and really figure out how we're going to solve some of the deeper problems.
We don't need to answer all of those questions day one to make some progress on this. There's a ton of basic work that needs to happen to enable that more detailed stuff down the line.
Yeah, absolutely.
We actually, if James, you scroll a little bit up, we actually had it, you know.
Yes.
Roles.
Good, super. Okay, so let's move to the third group. So the third group was our cost baselining and our thought of how might we get from 0 to a closed user group pilot running more simply than today. Who's going to talk about that?
So, shall I start talking about that, and then I'll have to give opportunity for the rest of the team, because I switched groups at some point as well, so that didn't help. So I think that this was something we saw quite a lot of support for, both in the discussions, the kind of vision and demonstrations that we gave earlier in the week, and certainly the discussions we're having in all the marketplaces, is that we want to be able to, as the greater we, the Merge Loop community, we want to be able to demonstrate a working system quickly and robustly to anybody who's interested. We want it to be so easy that you can start the experiment before you start the RFP. I think somebody had a great example of this and mentioned this in the discussion, that the investment people put into the RFP process, it should be that a Merge Loop pilot could be run for less than it costs to engage in that RFP, that you can actually start experimenting and coming up with a much better RFP, or maybe even discover the thing you've just tested is the thing you needed anyway. So there are a number of things, though, to that, and I think in a lot of the conversation, especially Innocent brought to us, because he's been engaged with both the hackathons and kind of demonstrating and showing DFSPs and fintechs how to get involved in the community, as well as talking to the Central Bank of Uganda about it. And actually reducing that cost not only is about the technology and the features that we're giving there, but also about the documentation. And we heard things about documentation in the first session, or the first group's feedback, and it's about having a dev portal, or it's about having the documentation that is actually accessible for the audience we're trying to support, because the decision-making process and for adoption, giving the decision makers the right level of information and experience is key. So we covered a lot of those kind of a broad remit of things. From the core technology, though, it resonated well. I think that we wanted to have a baseline, and in fact, in the core technology discussions, we were saying, well, we need to get certain things sorted out, like having API gateways and having a standard way of identity management and all that kind of stuff. And again, this is actually stuff which we said in this cost baselining and pilot in a box solution is really, it's about creating that standard issue. Yes, Merge Loop deployed, full security model, robust, can do real money on pilot rails. And my target, I just need all the technical teams to buy into it, but my target is really that we could stand that up in a day. that we can have that that experience available to folks, that we can build on the dev portals like we've got at the Beta Moja website, and that we saw with the DFS hackathons. We need that kind of dev intro to the platform. So I think we have, and there's a lot of things I think fit into the category of stuff we can do now quickly. And then, although we didn't discuss much of it yet today, there are things around stuff that was presented, I think, in June last year already with our Azure and IAC version 4 kind of conversations, which said some of the core services we're using now are open source and work, but there are things we could do much better, which will reduce the hardware requirements and the efforts that are needed. So better cloud orientated API solutions, for instance, like Ambassador or Keycloak for identity management, all open source solutions that the community can build with, but to build that more robust experience. And I'm sure I've lost a lot of other topics, but are there any questions or any other things the rest of the team want to call out at this point?
I think you captured it from a high level. So pilot in the box being this real money on real rails, including hub products and DFS products. So it's a full system to be deployed easily and easily available. And that ties in nicely with the hackathons. I think we want to continue with hackathons, and we want to keep engaging with and getting people to work with the solutions, because that builds interest and excitement in the product, and then aggregators and other people get involved in implementing some of those, and that will help with our adoption. So to help with this hackathons, there was a big emphasis on we actually need better documentation. We need to be speaking to the users, the decision makers, and the people actually using it. So in other words, use case specific documentation is useful, and then helping understand the roadblocks of the decision makers and providing them with tools and documentation to help navigate that. So it sounds like we still got a sales and knowledge problem that we need to overcome. Did I capture that in a sense?
And I think it links nicely back to Workstream 1, and the fact that actually there are now cross-pollinations, or not Workstream, Pillar 1, and we do need to start to work together as a community to get some of these kind of messages all kind of singing together and remove the silos. So that's really what I guess the outcome of today for me is, that we all see the big picture and how these things all interact with each other. Then we got to figure out how to get the work done, which is the next step next week. Have you guys had any thoughts about Q1 and what you want to try and do in this work, in this pillar?
We didn't get to that.
That's okay. I mean, I think it was supposed to be grooming, and I think I can hear from you that you believe that this is going to help us achieve our North Star. And I already saw, obviously, early in the week that you've got something that is a good MVP for us going into this work stream. Actually, the sandbox is closer than it's ever been. Okay, shall we move on to group 4? It's a good time, yeah? So, Adrian, I'll get you to talk a little bit what the conversation in group 4, and hopefully you can see how it links to the other conversations too.
So we started out by just going around the room and talking about what gaps we saw in the current software stack. So I think it's important to differentiate here when we talk about the product. I think we were mostly focused on the software. So obviously the product is more than that. And, this speaks to the first pillar, which is productize. In other words, fill in a lot of the non-technical gaps as well. So we went through that. And I think based on the people in the room at the time, it's unsurprising that this was mostly technical gaps. So talking about a lack of, UIs for people to work on, or where they exist, the user experience, it needs to be improved, the ability to deploy live development environments. Tech debt came up quite a bit in a few places, people talking about, things that they'd like to do differently if they did them again. And then some specific hard requirements came up, and probably the biggest one that was emphasized by multiple people was to do with security. So I am in identity and access management. And I think something that for me stuck out was differentiating between our two sets of APIs. We have the transactional APIs, or whatever we want to call them, the module loop APIs, FSP, IOP APIs, and we have the operational APIs or admin APIs. We've been very good at defining what drives I would call the settlement APIs operational, just because they're non-transactional, Miguel. So I'm lumping those all together. They potentially are a third group on their own, but for now, we went through a rigorous waterfall-y design process to get to the design of the transactional APIs. And so we have all the backing documentation about what are the use cases, what are the sequence diagrams of how all the parties interact. And so it's very clear where those APIs fit in. And then we went about building them, and we've, seen progressively at convenings, the core team showing, a list of APIs, and those lights have gone from green to yellow to red to green to yellow and so on. And that's great. But I think we agreed that what we need is something like that for the holistic product. So for the operator APIs, for the settlement APIs, and for that to be backed by UAT tests that prove that functionality exists and is implemented as expected. So that was one side of it. Then on the other side, there was discussion around some of the other things that came up, at least, were a discussion around clarity on the roadmap. So I'm paraphrasing sort of a comment, but we got to where we did based on a vision, not a plan. So we knew roughly what we were trying to get to, but we didn't have a very, we didn't sit back, design this thing based on a set of requirements, and then go and implement it, at least not for the operational bits. And so we're looking at it now and saying there's gaps, there's things we want to add. We haven't gotten to some stuff like forensic logging. We need to still figure out how we implement identity and access management in the operational APIs, because you can't just bolt those on afterwards. We actually, the impact of adding that to APIs is, runs deep. And so there's a bit of debate, I think, in terms of how good is our technical foundation as a starting point for a roadmap we want to flesh out. And my takeaway from that is we don't have actually enough data to make an informed decision about whether we should be building on the foundation we've got, or whether we should be taking a step back and designing modular version 2. Or both, so there's a lot of options and not enough data, was my takeaway. And so the two deliverables that I think we agree need to come out of this next PI, or at least this next quarter, is a feature baseline. Let's be very specific about what we have, back it up with a document that describes, the feature, sequence diagram, whatever, and UAT tests that show it's in the product. There it is. So that gives us data about what we have. But what we also need is a big picture architectural view of where we want to be. And so, a reference architecture. And so those are the two deliverables that I took away as things everyone wanted to see, was feature baseline, this is what we have feature by feature, and reference architecture. This is the architecture that we think we want to have based on what we've learned up to now and what we see coming down the line from implementers as new requirements or new features they want. So thinking about things like security, identity access management, cross-currency, foreign exchange, all of those things need to be considered in the big picture architectural design. We can't continue bolting stuff on as it comes up. So before we make decisions about, I think everybody wants to have a feature roadmap. Everyone wants to be able to go to the market and say, this is what we've got, this is what we plan to add, this is when it's going to come. And to get there, we have to do this other work first. And then once we've done this other work, we can also make decisions about how we implement that feature roadmap and where on the timeline things on that roadmap actually exist. So we can do the prioritization, we can do the effort estimates, we can do all of that. But a little bit of kind of call it homework that we have to go and do first to get there.
It's an awesome outcome for me, because actually Product Council have been saying this to me for weeks, that we really want a feature baseline. We want to understand what's in the product. We want to understand. So I love the fact that we've come to this conclusion that it's important for us to work together and do this feature baseline.
So I'd love others in the group to add anything I may have missed there. For me, I don't know if this is my personality, but I tend to immediately be trying to mentally picture what that looks like as a deliverable. And maybe it's premature to do that, but I think certainly for the feature baseline, I would love it if we had a document, and I feel like this is along the lines of what I've heard from some of the other pillars, a document that is broken out into some functional areas, and in each one it has a description of we have the ability to add a DFSP, and and then there's a test, and there's a sequence diagram of how it works or whatever the API looks like, and I think we have a lot of this information.
We do have the information,
not in a single
not in one place.
That can be aggregated up, and so someone can have a cover page that just has,
and here's a manual. Here's the manual.
A list of things with green or red or orange lights, as Steve said, and that people can refer back to and say, well, you said you have this thing, or you said you plan to have this thing. Why did you choose not to do it? So building on that, we're able to then think about, add a time dimension to it. This is what we have, and then we can start adding, this is what we want, and this is when it will happen.
So it does kind of feel like you also, over in that group, agreed with the go slower to go faster. And maybe it's important to put some of the projects that have not reached completion yet, maybe into some kind of holding pattern. Do you have any conversation at that level about what to do with the fact that there's so many things in the air?
There wasn't consensus. Would be my what I would say. There's competing demands, right? There's market demands. There's architectural desire for better architecture. There's my takeaway is we need more data. We don't all have a clear picture. Everyone is basing their suggestions and what they think on their sort of what they feel is the current position, and I'm not convinced we were all baselined on the current position, which is why I think that's the important first step.
And one of the data points that
wants to add there. I mean, everyone's
I want to add one thing. I think you're absolutely right on the data thing. I also think that one of the data points we don't talk about a lot is the cost to implement, the timelines to implement, and what we're not doing if we do this. And we are actually a fairly small community, and there's only so much we can achieve. So that's also worrying me as a product person in the community. Is like, what are we doing if we do prioritize certain things? What are we not doing?
Yeah, ultimately, I mean, I come back to this all the time. It's an open source project. People are going to ultimately work on what they want to contribute. I think we're at a point with you leading a product organization to be able to say, that's fine, but the focus of energy of the foundation is this. And right now it feels like the focus of energy for at least the next quarter is let's consolidate, let's understand what we have, let's think about where we want to be in 6 months, a year, 2 years from an architectural perspective, knowing what we see coming down the line as features and requirements. And then once we have that, it's a lot easier to make decisions about, some of the research work that's been done and how that fits into the roadmap. Is it added to what we've got? Is it a whole new product? Is it, something that gets put out to the marketplace and you say, well, we're not going to develop this. We think it's useful, but maybe there's commercial solutions out there for this particular requirement. It's a lot easier to have those conversations when the picture of what we have and where we want to get architecturally is clear.
100%. So
yeah. I heard.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So Adrian, I think Pedro actually said it well, where he said, we have to just, in the real world, we have to deal with the tactical as well as the strategic, right? And I think that's where we are now. And we have to find, and with our mission of going to market, getting traction, all the rest of it, maybe tactical has the slight edge at the moment in this next quarter, but ultimately for that long term, we need the strategic too. So I don't know. I'm encouraged. I think we're getting the balance more or less. Well.
Yeah, I think these are both of these deliverables are feed into the strategic direction. They're not tactical, but they don't preempt somebody doing tactical work now. So if somebody is reacting to a market need now and wants to add something, fine. I think that's what we have to live with as well. Is in an iterative software development world, stuff will get redone. That's part of how it works. You're sacrificing that for the sake of doing lots of upfront design. Let's accept that we're in a constantly changing environment, and we might implement something now to address something tactically and decide it gets re-implemented, to fit a different strategic architecture down the line. That's okay. Let's accept that.
Yeah, just to add a bit to that, I think it is a really difficult balance to have. The fundamental part of it is if we have that longer vision, if we have those features, if we have the roadmap, all of those decisions are really easy, or at least they start. It's smaller things, because every now and then we will have to make decisions about, is this tactical or strategic? And if it is tactical, is it moving us away or closer to the objective that we want? So having those tools, having that information is really critical. And another thing that I'd like to add to what Adrian said, having the vision of the features, we don't need the full detail of the features. Even if some of the features are not fleshed out and we only have an idea, we would like to have some high-level functionality about something that should be included or should be integrated with. I would say that's good enough. That's already very valuable to have an idea of what we want to have in the future without a lot of detail. Obviously, the more detail, the better. That's an obvious one, but just the idea is good enough. If that thing is in the wall, it's good enough for us to guide us.
So
I think it's about. Yeah, Pedro, I think that's one of the great things at the moment that I'm seeing is as we're getting more and more community members involved and more people interested in it and more people trying to accelerate and build out, actually having things where we have broad outlines, we have clarity of direction and, where we want where we're going with the modular product, actually opens up the coal face and more people can contribute into it.
It also leads, though, quite nicely, Warren and Pedro and Adrian, to a conversation that we've also been having this quarter in Product Council and at TGB. Where's the boundary of the product? We want something maintainable, sufficiently small, and we want to create a vibrant marketplace where we can signpost to other people's solutions. So the boundary at the moment for the Modular Foundations open source, it feels like the direction of travel is reference tools, reference UX, the core hub and its APIs. with clear examples from a marketplace of vendors in our ecosystem on what can be simply integrated. And we're starting to see the integration. So the key points where we need to put our effort in is our API the right API? And does our hubs do what it will say it will do? Because then we build the extensibility for the future, and all the roadmap requirements should be focused on extensibility as opposed to the core, which is our foundation.
I think the architecture has to enable that community feeling that everyone
exactly. And so at the moment, that's my question to the architecture team. Really, are we ready for extensibility, modularity, and the future of a marketplace? And that's a conversation we need to get into this quarter with this feature baseline.
And awesome. It also, the feature baseline also ties into the trust and confidence, because it reflects what's exactly there and communicates and gives clarity to adopters and current implementers as well.
I think it also, exactly, it helps our community sustainability. It also gets quite specific this year already, which I think is a nice feature of us being now in 2021 and as far along the curve as we are. We have our first situations happening with the FRMS tool being a shared service that is separate. What's the right interface points? We have the Greg's commercial tools. How do we interface them? How do we get them connected to the hub? So when we get specific, and we've done this thing 1 to 2 to 3 times and created the right boundaries of responsibility, we will understand our product a lot better. So I'm excited for the year ahead. I'm excited for this feature baseline through the lens of a product that is tight and small with extensibility. Anybody else got any thoughts on listening? If not, I will hand it over to Paula. Hopefully you saw themes. You saw how all 4 pillars kind of fit together, and that was on purpose. I wanted us to see we are a system. We all influence each other's work. And next week's work and beyond, getting to the actual, so what are we going to do then, it was important to get that shared understanding. So thank you for letting me play with you a little bit this quarter as we go into the next year with a very different format for this afternoon's work to normal. But we still need to get to the place where we have some kind of structure and planning. So expect lots of conversations over the next week or 2 with me and Kim. I think it's over to you, Paula.
Yeah, and then I'll let Simeon close out. But first of all, I think, I started this week with talking about our meta goal this year to really focus on gaining traction. And the way in which we do that is to ensure we get more deployments, pilot projects, proof of concepts, large scale deployments, you name it. And so I think what we were able to do this week, and particularly today, is talk about how we can work smarter so that we can meet those objectives. And what are the gaps? What are the tools? What are the gaps in the products, in our messaging, to help us gain traction on those deployments? So I'm really encouraged to see the pivot there. And the shift to market-based priorities. We've had a lot of effort on the development, and you guys have done some really heavy lifting for the last 4 years, but it's now time for us to broaden the base of contributors to make us all successful. That said, I think, as Steve noted earlier, we need to do a better job of bringing the business community back on Friday during these week-long events, get the marketing steering group and product council members involved in some of these sessions, because, as we have pivoted the content and some of the activity that we do on Fridays, we need their voice in those discussions. And so we'll circle back with those teams next week and make sure that they're on board with some of the priorities that were fleshed out today. Finally, I'd like to thank Leslie Ann for the iterations all week long, refinements on how we wanted to tackle problems. Kim, amazing daily summaries. There's a lot of great information in there, and I know everyone really has benefited from having them, and others will benefit as well, folks that haven't been able to participate in every event every day. But there's also a bunch of elves in the background. Alyssa, our overall event coordinator, but Catherine, Amanda, and Bella, who have been, unbeknownst to many of you, in the background scurrying to find speakers that in some cases decided to show up about a minute before they were supposed to go on live. So hopefully you didn't see any of the heartburn that was created because Megan and Catherine and Amanda and Melissa were all actively making sure everyone had what they needed to log in, register, provide additional slides, etc. So thank you, ladies, for that work. We appreciate it. Also, Mac and John from IPG and making sure Zoom stayed live, and all the different machinations and variants of Zoom that we used were effective. And I can't emphasize how much I appreciate the outliers on the Pacific West Coast and in Australia and Singapore that have had some ungodly hours this week. I do appreciate your hanging in there. It really is valuable to have your input. I think it goes without saying that we can't wait till we can all do this together in one time zone in the future. And then finally, I want to thank Simeon, master of the schedule, did a great job in keeping us on track. What are we, 4 minutes ahead of schedule right now? I think you were really crisp this week in keeping everyone on schedule, and I do appreciate that. I know it requires a lot of energy and attention on your part to make sure that things run smoothly, so do appreciate it. So with that, I think we have a great 2021 ahead of us. I look forward to all of yours continued contribution and feedback, either indirectly or directly. You know how to reach me. And Simeon, I'll hand it over to you to close things out.
Sure. Just two small logistical items. One is we now have the recordings of the sessions for Monday and Tuesday up on YouTube. They're linked in the agenda page and on Discourse. The rest will be coming pretty soon. So please do look out for that. The slides, all the slides are updated on the agenda page and on Discourse as well, just in case you want to revisit and relive some of the experiences we've shared this week. And then the last thing is the survey. There is a link in Slack for those of you guys who are in Slack, and in the chat there for you. Please take a minute to fill out that survey. Let us know what you think about the event and the feedback. We use this information to better plan, to plan for better events in the future. That said, thank you so much, everybody, for spending time with us, and we will see you on the interwebs. Have a good one.
Thanks, everybody. Always
fun. Thanks, Simeon. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Simeon.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, everyone, for a great meeting.
Bye, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye. Bye. Take care.